In the sweltering summer of 1852, Colonel Baptiste Broussard, a man whose wealth and cruelty were legendary along the Mississippi, did something that defied all logic and decency. He summoned 3 of his most physically imposing enslaved men to his private study, not for punishment, but for a proposal. He offered them his own sister, Genevieve Broussard, a woman of nearly 400 pounds, hidden from public view for years. The proposal was not for her care, nor her protection, it was for breeding. The colonel, obsessed with his family's legacy, ordered these men to father her children, convinced he could engineer a new, superior line of heirs. The Louisiana elite whispered that Genevieve was an invalid, a glutton, a family shame. They had no earthly idea she was the unwilling matriarch of a monstrous experiment. Within 3 years, that experiment had produced children unlike any seen before. The plantation was consumed by a silent madness, and the Broussard name was forever tied to a horror that could not be buried. What kind of children did this unholy union create? And what did the colonel do when he realized he had not created a dynasty, but a living nightmare? Before we descend into the shadows of the Broussard estate, make sure you are subscribed to Forgotten AMC, ring that notification bell, and comment below with the darkest historical secret you've ever heard. Now let us travel back to that humid Louisiana summer, where the cicadas buzzed like warnings and the devil was drawing up his plans. The air at Belle Rêve Plantation was thick enough to be worn like a cloak, heavy with the scent of magnolia and the rot of the swamps. Presiding over this domain was Colonel Baptiste Broussard, a man built from ambition and casual brutality. He was not old money. His fortune in sugar and cotton was new, carved out of the land with the sweat and blood of the hundreds he owned. Because of this, he was consumed by a single gnawing fear, that his legacy would be as shallow as his lineage. His wife had failed to produce a son, giving him only 2 frail daughters who seemed to wilt in the oppressive heat. He saw weakness everywhere, a creeping rot in his own bloodline that threatened to undo everything he had built. He believed the aristocracy of New Orleans mocked him behind their fans, calling him a brutish upstart whose line would end with him. His obsession grew, festering in the quiet nights at Belle Rêve. He began reading forbidden texts, fringe theories on animal husbandry and eugenics, convinced that what worked for horses and dogs could be perfected in men. He looked at his enslaved workers not as people, but as a collection of traits. He saw their strength, their endurance, their resilience to the brutal sun, and he coveted it. He believed these were genetic qualities he could steal, could weave into his own failing bloodline to create something stronger, something that would last for centuries. This was not just about an heir, it was about creating a new class of human, a Broussard-bred specimen that would be the ultimate symbol of his power. And he had the perfect vessel for his experiment, hidden away upstairs, his own sister. Genevieve Broussard was a prisoner in her own home. Once a celebrated beauty, a series of personal tragedies and a metabolic affliction had caused her weight to balloon, transforming her in the eyes of society from a prize into a pariah. Baptiste, her brother and guardian, publicly framed her seclusion as an act of mercy, protecting her from the cruel stares of the world. In reality, he was hiding what he considered a blemish on his family's reputation. She lived in a suite of rooms in the west wing of the mansion, filled with the finest silks and furniture, but the windows were shuttered, and the doors were locked from the outside. Her world was a suffocating loop of meals delivered by silent servants and the distant sounds of a life she was no longer part of. When Baptiste first came to her with his proposal, she thought it was a cruel joke born of a drunken stupor. He didn't speak of legacy or bloodlines. He spoke to her as a farmer speaks of livestock. He told her she still had a purpose to serve, that her sturdy frame and resilient constitution, as he called it, were assets. He promised her that if she complied, her children would live in the main house, raised as Broussards, and she would be afforded a new level of comfort. If she refused, he calmly explained, he would have her committed to the state asylum in Jackson, a place from which no one returned. Genevieve was trapped. The 3 men chosen for this horror were Thomas, a towering man from the fields with hands that could snap sugarcane like twigs; Joseph, a quiet, intelligent man who served as the plantation's blacksmith; and Marcus, a young man known for his defiant spirit. They were given no choice, threatened with the sale of their own families if they disobeyed the colonel's grotesque decree. The West Wing of Belle Rêve became a silent, terrifying theater of the Colonel's will, a place where human beings were reduced to their most basic biological components, all in service of one man's monstrous ego. The first pregnancy was a time of excruciating tension at Belle Rêve. The Colonel was manic, pacing the halls, alternating between triumphant declarations to his empty study and fits of paranoid rage. He had the West Wing completely sealed off, ordering a private physician from New Orleans under the threat of blackmail to oversee the process. The doctor, a man named Moreau, was horrified but too terrified of the Colonel's influence to refuse. He became a reluctant co-conspirator, his medical logs written in a cryptic code of his own design. When Genevieve's first child, a boy, was born, the Colonel was ecstatic. For a few weeks he believed his twisted gamble had paid off. But as the infant grew, unsettling signs began to emerge. The baby was strangely lethargic, with clouded, unfocused eyes and a head that was unnaturally large for his small body. He rarely cried, producing only a low, guttural humming. Dr. Moreau's coded notes spoke of cranial abnormalities and a profound disconnect of the senses. The Colonel, in his denial, blamed Genevieve's health. He declared the first attempt a misfire and, with chilling resolve, ordered the experiment to continue. A second child, a girl, was conceived with a different father before the first had even learned to crawl. This child was born with different but equally disturbing afflictions. Her limbs were oddly jointed, and one side of her face seemed to droop, giving her a permanent, tragic sneer. The whispers among the house staff turned from fearful gossip to genuine terror. They spoke of the children as les choses, the things, and claimed the West Wing was now cursed, haunted by the unnatural spirits that had been brought into the world there. The Colonel's dream of a superior heir was dissolving into a gallery of biological horrors, but his pride and madness would not let him stop. He was no longer just building a dynasty, he was defying God, and he was losing. By the end of the third year, there were 4 children locked in the West Wing with Genevieve. Each child was a different permutation of the Colonel's failure, marked by a range of physical and cognitive deformities that grew more pronounced with each birth. The wing, once opulent, had descended into a squalid, chaotic nursery of despair. Genevieve, broken and lost in a sea of grief, could barely manage her own needs, let alone the needs of her uniquely afflicted children. The Colonel, now a prisoner of his own obsession, rarely left the plantation. His obsession had curdled into pure rage. He saw the children not as his kin, but as insults, as living monuments to his miscalculation. One night, fueled by brandy and self-loathing, he stormed into the West Wing, intent on no one knew what. To end it, perhaps. To erase his mistake. Joseph, the blacksmith, who was being led to the wing for his scheduled duty, heard the screams. It was not the children, but Genevieve, a sound of primal fear and defiance he had never heard before. He broke from his escort and smashed the lock on the wing's main door. The scene he found was one of Gothic horror. The Colonel stood over the oldest child with a belt raised, and Genevieve, in a feat of adrenaline-fueled strength that defied her size and long confinement, had thrown herself between them. In that moment, something in Joseph snapped. He saw not a master, but a monster. He saw not a fat, disgraced woman, but a mother protecting her young. The ensuing struggle was brutal and short. The Colonel, a man who had wielded absolute power his entire life, was not prepared for the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. By the time the plantation overseer arrived, the Colonel was on the floor, his head crushed by a heavy iron candelabra, and the West Wing was on fire. The fire at Belle Rêve consumed the West Wing before it could be contained, turning the Colonel's monstrous laboratory into his funeral pyre. In the chaos that followed, the official story was quickly cemented: a tragic accident. The reclusive, mentally unstable sister, in a fit of madness, had attacked her brother and set the fire, perishing in the flames along with her illegitimate offspring. It was a neat, tidy story that preserved what was left of the Broussard name and buried the horrifying truth under a layer of respectable tragedy. The plantation was sold, its name changed, and the story of Colonel Broussard became a cautionary tale about pride, not a confession of unspeakable evil. But what really happened to Genevieve and the children? Joseph, the blacksmith, disappeared that night, never to be seen again. Some of the older slaves would later whisper that he didn't run alone. They said he guided a large woman and 4 small strange figures through the swamps under the cover of smoke and darkness, towards the free communities of the bayou, where they could disappear forever. No record of them ever surfaced. The only hint of the true story came years later, when Dr. Moreau's coded journals were discovered. While largely indecipherable, one translated passage read, "He sought to forge demigods from flesh and blood, but in his arrogance he forgot that when you play with the pieces of man, you do not get a king, you get a monster, and the greatest monster of all was the one holding the hammer." The story of the Broussard family serves as a chilling reminder that the darkest secrets are not those buried in the ground, but those that walk and breathe, born from the monstrous ambitions of men who believe they have the right to play God. What do you believe happened to Genevieve and her children? Could they have survived in the swamps, or was the official story the true one? Leave your theory in the comments below. If you want to explore more forgotten histories and the dark secrets they hold, subscribe to Forgotten AMC and hit the notification bell. These stories deserve to be remembered, and these voices deserve to be heard. Thank you for watching.